practicing over 15 years, and I also am certified to do trauma work, and so had quite extensive training with dealing with trauma and working with individuals that have been faced with trauma. So the goals of the presentation is to define trauma and its effects on us, learn signs to help recognize, trauma, and then describe some ways to cope with it. I gave y'all some handouts, just some things y'all can take with y'all. You can, of course, if you have ink, write on it, whatever, that's y'all's to keep with you. So what is trauma? Trauma is our physical and emotional response to events that we perceive threatens our life or our physical well-being. Or it can be us witnessing these things happening to someone very close to us. That can also be traumatic. It overwhelms our capacity to cope, and it also can create feelings of terror, powerlessness, and out of control physiological arousal. There are 3 different classes of trauma. You have acute trauma, so that's short term. Anytime you see acute, that's short term. So a short term reaction or response to it. You have chronic trauma, so something that has just kind of dealt with a long time. And then you have complex trauma. Complex trauma is when it's been more than one event that has impacted you. So how common do y'all think trauma is?
Very common.
Very common. Now we talk about it more in our community, but years ago, mental illness and things like that was not something that was talked about much in the Black community. Now we are desensitized to it, meaning we're more comfortable talking about it. But 6 out of every 100 people, so 6% of the U.S. population will have PTSD at some point in their life. Almost 25 to 30% of adults report that they were physically abused in childhood. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys experiences sexual abuse. What's the point of that? We all know somebody who has experienced trauma. You may not know it, but if you poll the people in your life, you probably know someone who has experienced trauma. So, effects of it affects brain development, especially when you have young kids that deal with trauma. It affects their brain development, your memory, your learning, your cognitive functioning, planning. It affects our biology, and it also affects relationships. I think that's the bottom one is what we see most common. Our attachments, how we are socially isolated, and even the ability to be empathetic with others. Affects our mood, our ability to regulate our mood, which is emotional regulation, even recognizing our mood, and sometimes dissociating. It affects our behavior. You know, sometimes people can have poor impulse control, self-harm, be aggressive, and then also self-concept. So body image, self-esteem, shame, and guilt. When you think about trauma and behavior, and we talk about how it affects the brain, we have triggers. You know, when people have experienced a traumatic event, they can be triggered, which are just reminders of that trauma. Activates our alarm system. How many of y'all have heard of fight or flight? Going into fight or flight mode when you're faced with a stressful situation. Have y'all heard of that before, that term? Fight or flight, where you're going to deal with it or you try to escape it, one or the other. Brain shuts off. And then your behavior, if you behave as if what happened in the past is happening now, as if that's still occurring for you. So let's talk about a very common traumatic disorder. We've all heard of PTSD, right?
Right.
PTSD can be diagnosed if someone has experienced, witnessed, or been confronted with one or more events that involve real or threatened death or serious injury to the physical integrity of themselves or others. Not everybody develops PTSD following a traumatic event, but that's a pretty common Pretty common. Some symptoms of PTSD include re-experiencing the traumatic event. So that's through having nightmares or intrusive memories, being avoidant of thoughts, feelings, places, and people associated with the trauma. It can have a negative impact on your behavior and mood, and then cause increased arousal. So what that means is you might have, one of the examples is heightened startle response. And so more jumpy or, anxious, things like that. Could cause sleep issues, sleep disorders, and irritability. That's not the only diagnosis that can come as a result of trauma. In kids that experience trauma, we see what's called reactive attachment disorder. And that's where one of two things can happen. Either they attach to whoever, it can be a random stranger, very clingy, or they cannot attach and have serious problems in relationships. We see that a lot of times with kids in foster care. They deal with reactive attachment, and you see just extreme behaviors out of them because they don't have the ability to attach to other people. We sometimes see ADHD, oppositional defiant disorders. It can morph into bipolar disorder or even a conduct disorder. And these still may not capture the full picture of the effects that of a trauma. So recognizing the effects of trauma, it can look different. You have people who have recently experienced the trauma or are currently experiencing it. You have people who may be an adult who has had trauma in the past and they've never shared it. And then you have people that you know who have had trauma in their past. So someone who has a recent or ongoing trauma, an example of that would be a child who's currently being abused, or even an adult who's currently being abused. So some signs you might see is behavior or mood changes. Kids, they're suddenly acting out more, but even adults can act out more. Appetite and weight changes. Avoiding activities that, you used to enjoy. For kids, acting younger, so they might start wetting the bed or having, fear. Kids, you may see they have some sexual knowledge they shouldn't have for their age, or for adults, if it's sexual abuse in their history, can be sexually promiscuous. So those are some signs, and then those are just some highlights. If you notice those in anybody, there's all, you have child abuse hotlines, but you also have adult protective services, even if you know an adult that's been exposed to trauma. Undisclosed trauma, that would be a person who has been abused as a child and hadn't told anyone. That could be a friend or someone close to you that you know. And some signs, relationship difficulties, they may suffer from depression. They just might be overly sensitive to what they perceive as a threat, or they may deal with substance abuse. A lot of times we don't know it's trauma, but we may see these other things going on, and you may wonder what's going on with that person. The other class I talked about was having a known history. So, say a friend tells you about an abusive childhood. Trauma can have long-term impacts. And even if somebody has dealt with or been treated for their trauma, they still may have setbacks. You may notice a person's behaviors might seem strange or irrational. You might think, oh, this person's acting strange, but once you learn, oh, they've had a traumatic experience, then it may make sense why they act the way that they act. So how do you support someone, or if someone in here has a history of trauma, how you might can relate how someone could support you? Recognizing the impact trauma has had on them, helping a person feel safe. And this is what, when we're treating someone in the mental health field, these are things we aim to do. helping someone understand and manage overwhelming emotions and difficult behaviors. And then also, ultimately, the goal is to help make new meaning of the trauma history and current experiences. So how do you cope with trauma? One of the biggest things is, I like to call it stinking thinking. Getting rid of stinking thinking. One of the handouts I gave y'all, the one that has that triangle. Who else came in, Judy?
Thank you.
So if y'all look on here, so when we talk about, I talk about stinking thinking or cognitive distortions. Those are automatic thoughts that we may have where you automatically, you might make a generalization, or your thinking on a situation may be distorted. On the front, the purpose of this triangle is to just illustrate how our thoughts, our feelings, and our behavior, they all coincide. Oftentimes, you may notice a behavior, but when you stop and think and look back and trace back to the thought that led to that behavior and what emotion that thought caused, then, oh, well, this is why this behavior happened. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So if you flip over, I'll put in some examples of some distorted, some common distorted thinking patterns. So 10 forms of self-defeating thoughts. All or none thinking. You see things in black and white categories. If a situation falls short of perfect, you see it as a total failure. For example, when a young woman on a diet ate a spoonful of ice cream, she told herself, "I've blown my diet completely." This thought upset her so much that she gobbled down an entire quart of ice cream. Overgeneralization. And you know what, we're all guilty of having distorted thinking patterns because we're human. So what does it mean to overgeneralize? You see a single negative event, for example, a romantic rejection or a career reversal, as a never-ending pattern of defeat by using the words always or never when you think about it. Mental filters, and they're the one. You pick out a single negative detail and dwell on it exclusively instead of looking at the whole picture. That way, when that happens, your vision of the reality becomes so darkened that you go down just this rabbit hole. Another one would be discounting the positive. You reject positive experiences by insisting they don't count. If you do a good job, you may tell yourself that it wasn't good enough or that anyone could have done as well. So discounting the positive takes the joy out of life and makes you feel inadequate and unrewarded. So there's some other ones: jumping to conclusions, magnifying something, emotional reasoning. That's where you assume that your negative emotions necessarily reflect the way things really are, even though they may not. You give should statements, you label, or you personalize and blame. How many of y'all deal with distorted thoughts sometimes? Yeah. So oftentimes when someone is dealing with trauma, one of the things that it affects is their thinking. It distorts their thinking. And so that's why it's important to recognize the relationship between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Another thing with coping with trauma is learning and using relaxation techniques in response to triggers. Earlier on, before some of y'all got in here, I talked about how trauma can affect our brain, and it can cause us, certain things can trigger us. And so learning to have a coping skill when you are triggered will prevent anxiety or panic attacks, which are very common responses. And when you're in professional treatment, ultimately the goal is to gradually expose you to the very thing that elicits those negative feelings and behaviors from you. So those triggers and things like that, ultimately if you are gradually exposed to those things and you know how to cope or use a relaxation skill to deal with it, then it really desensitizes you to those triggers. Also in that packet, there are some examples of how to fix cognitive distortions. So when we talk about coping with trauma, a huge thing is being aware of your emotions. If y'all flip over, I included a vocabulary of emotions. Y'all ever feel something and you just can't quite put a label to it? You don't know what it is? Well, now you got a cheat sheet. So on the vocabulary of emotions, you see to the left, you have strong, medium, and light. And then up top, you have general feelings: happiness, caring, depression, fear, confusion, hurt, anger. So let's just say you're angry, but it's just light. You're lightly angry, right? If you scroll down, go to the column of anger and scroll down to light, some words to describe that might be, oh, I'm just a little bugged about it. It's not that big of a deal, but I'm bugged about it. Say you're feeling confused, and it's to a medium degree. There are some words, there. I'm frustrated. Could be a word to describe that. But this is important because oftentimes we discount our emotions. You discount it, and when you discount it, how does that make you feel? It goes really back to those distorted thinking patterns. And that's how we get into discounting ultimately the situation and the impact that it has on us. So emotions are okay, but sometimes expressing negative emotions too much can be overwhelming. And that's why you want to have a good balance with that. Whether it's you or somebody you know that's dealing with something, validating feelings are very important. And sometimes you have to validate your own feelings. You can validate your own feelings. When you do that, emotions usually become less overwhelming and less powerful if they're recognized and accepted. Also, a few basic relaxation exercises can help diffuse overly intense emotions in the moment. The other handout that I gave y'all, the one that has trauma defined on the front, if you flip through, the back has different relaxation exercises that can be practiced and implemented. Ultimately, when coping with trauma, depending on how serious, and some of y'all relate coming in, we talked about 3 different classes of trauma. You have acute trauma, you have chronic trauma, you have complex trauma, right? Some people deal with trauma. Some people have been exposed to trauma, adults in their childhood that have never been disclosed to anybody, but you can see it in their behavior, their actions, and things like that. Ultimately, mental health treatment never fails. We talked about how, as a community, we are definitely more open now to mental health and psychiatric treatment than we were years ago. And so that's always helpful, but everybody is still not comfortable with that. And so that's why it's important to be able to recognize our feelings and our behaviors and be able to connect that to whatever may have happened to us. But eventually a person can bring good out of a bad experience. That doesn't mean that the experience was good. That doesn't mean that the perpetrator, what they did was okay. But it means that as a survivor, you can grow and become a stronger person. And that's ultimately the goal. So new meaning really just simply means living your own life. Some people can take their situation and turn it into something positive. They can use it to help others, to do good with helping others. Years ago, previously, we did something, a ministry called Healed Hearts, and it was surrounded around women that had been exposed to trauma, in childhood or in some parts of, at some point in their life, But that was an example, really, of using that experience to take new meaning. Y'all have any questions so far?
I kind of have a comment, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
So, is it bad when, in a way, with your a person have trauma and they try to make sure nobody else go through anything like that? Like, for example, through some of the things I've been through in life, I try to make sure nobody else experiences it. I'm very. I think the gift of empathy is put on me, everything like that, and it really humbles me. And sometimes I think I put myself in the line of fire because you never want nobody to go through some of the things you have went through, because you understand the effect, you understand the results, you understand what it can be. Even though in a way you putting yourself in a line of fire for other people might be damaging you, but you like, I'm already damaged in a way, so let me make sure this other person don't experience no damage.
You know what I just heard? What y'all hear out of everything he said?
Others are more important.
That, and I heard something else. She said you're putting others ahead of you, but he said, I'm a damaged person. That's a prime example of what? Trauma, but what else did I talk about? That distorted thinking. What you tell yourself, you'll start to believe it, and then you'll start to behave in that way. So how could you rephrase that?
Well, I am a healing person because I'm healing and I don't allow it to affect me, but still in a way I put others before myself because I understand the healing process, but also I understand the process of the journey of what you have to go through to become healed.
And what happened to you doesn't define you. It affects you, and so that's where it goes. You can definitely label and acknowledge how it makes you feel, even if it still affects you, but it doesn't define you. That happened to me, but, and then follow that up with something positive. And as far as helping, not wanting other people to, go through what you went through, that's great, but don't do it at the expense of you. Gotta take care of you first. I like to use the example when you're flying, and they give you their little spiel. If you're ever if the plane goes down or whatever, and the oxygen mask drops down, who do they say to put it on first? Yourself. That is the hardest concept. I know for me, to put me first. That's so hard to put yourself first in front of others, because that itself makes you feel like you're being selfish or and all of that. But really, it's not. You can't help nobody else if you're not okay.
That's right.
Did anybody else have any comments? These are just a few things, in terms of helping make a new meaning. Scrapbooking, journaling is good. Describing your life in some way that's not just limited to that traumatic experience. What would you tell somebody else in this situation? What have I learned? There's always a learning experience in something, with whatever we go through.
So is that why you would include the traumatic experience stuff in the scrapbook so you can explain to somebody?
Yeah. Yeah. Any questions or other comments? If y'all flip these, we're says relaxation exercises. How many of y'all have ever done any relaxation?
Like meditation.
You can meditate. Did y'all know that research suggests that daily meditation may alter the brain's neural pathways, making you more resilient to stress? Deep breathing is one. A lot of times when we do deep breathing, people think it's just, that's not really deep breathing. So we gonna practice. Everybody close their eyes. We're gonna practice deep breathing. So when I say go, I want you to take a deep breath in through your nose. When I say go, and when I say let it out, I want you to blow it out of your mouth. I want to hear. Okay? Take a deep breath in. Blow it out of your mouth. Take a deep breath in. Blow it out. Ooh, the young lady in the brown shirt. You're not blowing through your mouth. Deep breath in. I'm looking.
Now you call me out.
Deep breath in. Blow it out. Sometimes even in the middle of the day, you'll be surprised how that can just center you. To literally take it in and just blow it out to where you are literally blowing out. That's a proper deep breath.
Feel better.
Feel better.
And when you blow it out, if you blow through perched lips, it's much more effective because at that point the oxygen connects to synapses in your brain, and it's a healing process.
Yeah. Another one, number 3 says to be present. That's where you take 5 minutes and focus on only one behavior, but you're aware. So for example, you rush through dinner, hurry to your next appointment, race to finish one thing on your agenda. You just running. Slow down. And so when we talk about being present, notice how the air feels on your face when you're walking. Enjoy the texture of the food you're eating. So you're just taking and you're focusing on one behavior. That's being present. All that's designed to just make you stop. Kind of center yourself. Tuning into your body. Being aware of places where you might feel tight or loose. And so you can mentally scan your body to get a sense of how stress affects it each day. So for example, you can lie on your back or sit with your feet on the floor. Start at your toes and work your way up to your scalp, noticing how your body feels. For 1 to 2 minutes, imagine each deep breath flowing to that body part. Repeat that as you move your focus up your body, paying close attention to sensations you feel in each body part. Decompressing is one. Laughing out loud. When's the last time y'all had a good laugh out loud? I honestly don't know the last time I had a good laugh out loud. Moving. Do y'all exercise? We getting into my favorite time of year, fall. Great time to get out and walk. Being grateful is another considered a relaxation exercise. And so you can do that by just keeping a gratitude journal. I like freestyling journaling where I just write down whatever I'm thinking in the moment. It doesn't have to be the whole page. It could be a sentence or two. So, that's a part of bringing you into awareness. So being grateful. Any question on relaxation? I didn't want to go too deep because it's such a sensitive topic. So I kept it real surface. But y'all, if y'all have any questions and y'all want to reach out to me privately, you can. But I'm always cognizant when covering stuff like this because things can be triggering for people. And you want to be sensitive to that.
I have another thing in mind. And I was saying this in the other psychology class that I was in yesterday that, you know, it's kind of different for men because, you know, you always talk, you just holding in or you just figure it out yourself or you just trying to find your vision of how to do it and stuff like that, or you just, you know, in a way disconnect from people that you need to disconnect from, learn how to find yourself. But, you know, sometimes, you know, and this, to me, this, I hate to phrase it like this, it kind of sound like a punk when I say this, but, you know, you just want somebody to ask you, you know, is everything okay? I mean, you're not going to just go out and be like, hey, ask me if everything okay. You know, you're going to try to figure it out and try to brace and become the best man that you can be or best person you can be. You know, and I used to have an associate that was in the military, and they used to tell me, man, look, and believe it or not, people that are in the military, when you're talking about PTSD and stuff like that, when they come back, they come back disconnected. The only thing they know pretty much is a ball, because if they feel like, you know, if they're getting close to somebody, just like the person they lost in their platoon, they're gonna lose somebody else. Mm-hmm. So you never really come back to reality of what's going on. And you know, they be like, man, look, what we experience or such a well-to-do, look, you just bind that down. Now, you don't let it dictate if you're in a relationship or anything like that, because you know you got to talk about it and want. But outside of that, you just bind it down and you try to find it and figure out the best version of yourself, because you really don't have nobody to trust or to defy in and stuff like that. And that's how a lot of men are raised up. I mean, of course, you know, not my parents per se or anything like that, but you know, I had learned that a lot of things I just bottle down. You know what I'm saying? Because never mind. It sounds like I'm getting too
No, but that is true. I mean, a lot of
that.
boys are raised that expressing emotions is a sign of weakness.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we've come a long way in terms of how we're raising our, you know, boys now, because I mean things have changed a lot because we talk about things more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so talking about things more does bring about a change. And
So does anxiety come from trauma?
it can. So anxiety by definition is excessive fear or worry, but it gets to the point to where we start to have a physiological response to it.
Okay.
Oftentimes that is a sign of trauma when someone's dealing with anxiety, but having anxiety doesn't mean you experience trauma. But that is a very common sign. So like when we talk about PTSD, you know, a lot of times people have panic attacks. That's a response to anxiety, extreme anxiety.
What are some other examples of anxiety?
Ruminating over things. You just keep thinking about the same thing over and over. You can't let things go. That's a sign of anxiety.
How do you combat that? How do you stop yourself from thinking about something like that over and over and over?
A lot of it is, for one, becoming aware of what it is. I talk a lot about those cognitive distortions. That's why I gave that to y'all, because that oftentimes can lead our thing. We have what's called automatic thoughts. So it's almost like we've been conditioned to think a certain way. You don't realize that these thoughts are popping in your head the way that they are, and that's why whenever I'm working with someone, I like to use this. But what I will do is have them journal. What I like to do is have them journal and oftentimes it starts with the behavior. So a behavior is any way you're acting. So I find myself not sleeping, or I find myself having a panic attack, or something along those lines. Start with the behavior, now let's backtrack. First of all, what happened? What was the situation? We already know what the behavior was. How did that make me feel? What was I thinking? When you go back to what you were thinking, was it a distorted thought? Or was it factual in reality? It probably was a distorted thought that sent you in this tailspin. So now let's counter that thought. Does that make sense? It's work. It's work. It's
So
work.
you're angry, this is the behavior that's applied as triangle.
Well, angry would be the feeling.
Okay.
What?
You hit somebody,
Yes.
okay. You hit somebody, then we do the triangle. What were we feeling? We're feeling angry. And then what were we thinking about that caused us to feel angry?
Yep.
And then that would narrow down why we act.
You can connect, but then oftentimes when we see what that thought was that a rational thought?
Okay,
Or
so
what-
then we need to evaluate the thought.
Evaluate your thought.
Okay. So,
You can't have, we don't stop and think about this. You can't have one without the other. You cannot have an emotion without having an associated thought or behavior, good or bad. You can't, no way around it. You cannot have one without the other.
So how do you stop the cycle? If you continue to think on it, and think on it, and think on it, how do you stop it?
You got homework to do.
Yeah.
okay, these cards.
You know what I was
Okay.
Get yourself a journal or a notebook or something, and when you find, and really, literally write it down. That's just your personal thing. So start with whatever you recognize first. If it's a negative emotion, write down. Do you a column? With all three. What was the emotion, or what was the behavior that happened? How did this make me feel? What was I? And it could be more than one thought. What were all the thoughts I had associated in this situation? And then you go through and knock down, were these rational thoughts or irrational thoughts? Go back to, remember I gave you examples of cognitive distortions? You got your all or none thinking, where you overgeneralizing, where you go through a mental filter. So it takes work and practice. That's where therapy comes in. Do you have therapy? I do, but I don't do a lot of therapy anymore. I do a lot of psychological testing.
Really? Oh,
So,
Yeah.
so like I said, instantly you went through trauma, real bad trauma, and you think about it every day, and you ask God to, why can't I stop thinking about this? Is that anxiety?
Partly, probably.
So I need to talk to somebody, huh? Talk about myself.
It probably wouldn't help. It would help. It wouldn't hurt to talk to somebody. Because a lot of times, and people think, oh, a therapist will just tell me something I already know. But you'll be surprised when you bounce a situation off somebody, and we're trained to know these types of things and to listen and to point it and give you that feedback. We do a lot of listening, but we're also listening to get an understanding to help you gain insight into yourself, really. But talking to someone could help you see a new perspective, could help point out those thoughts that might be irrational, that's causing you, help you practice and get some solid relaxation or coping skills down.
Because I'm okay, I mean, I'm all right, but I just wondered, why can't I forget it? Why just,
And you may not ever forget, but the goal is to be able to cope with it. So if a thought pops in, you know what, I'm going to refocus my thinking onto something else. So let me practice doing that. Every time I have this thought, I'm going to do this. So that would be an example of coping with it. And if you do things consistently, and then that'll become an automatic response.
I kind of got a deep revelation away of the triangle, and I want y'all to tell me if I'm overthinking it. But this also will help you in communication. You know, understanding a person's thought or emotion or behavior. You know,